What is wrong with black people?
What is that a setup?
No.
You know, the the black people in the United States have an interesting, a very unique history. So it can't be denied that the culture that they had before they came here was stripped from them. And as they were being systematically put into what is American culture, there was segregation and things like that. So they weren't really welcome in white culture. So they didn't know what their culture was, and they knew white people had a culture, so they weren't sure what to do. So I believe that they started a culture, and a lot of it might have been based on being rebellious and things like that. That's why you see like the rap music and things like that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I think they're living life the way they want to live it.
So you don't think anything is wrong with most, not all, but most black people, you don't think anything is wrong with them?
No, I think they put these victims on television, these people who have these total victim mindsets, but I don't think those people speak for the average black person.
And so when you see them burning, begging, blaming, I saw a report this morning somewhere that the education in America is lower than ever before. And that's because white people have lowered the standard of the education system in order to let the blacks in. When they take the SAT tests and things like that. So they had to lower the standards to let the blacks in. Things are falling apart as a result of that, and they are still not satisfied. We've given them affirmative action. We've given them the white communities, white businesses, the white government and everything. And all they're doing is destroying it. They're not making it better. Why is that?
Well, there are a small percentage of them that were burning cities down. And
a small percent? I saw a big number.
On TV, it looked like a lot. But I didn't see any of the black people in Tulsa doing that. They had a couple of Black Lives Matter marches. Nothing was burnt down or anything like that. But I think in general, when black people were being assimilated into white culture, I think generally they didn't want to be part of the school system, and they felt like they weren't part of the school system. So I think they weren't taking it as seriously. And I think as time goes on, they're going to get better and better at it. And I think that's what we've been seeing, but it's going to be a process.
When you say black culture, what is the black culture?
See, that's the thing. I can't speak on it because I don't know about it, but I'm not a part of it, I should say. But everybody has a culture, whether they realize it or not. And people in Africa, people in Kenya have their own culture. People in Nigeria have their own culture. But black people in the United States are unfamiliar with their culture. So they're trying to create one that is brand new. It's literally the newest culture in human history. So it's still in its infantile stages.
So you believe that in Africa, black people have a culture in Africa?
Yeah, well, I think each country probably has its own culture.
So if black people have a culture in Africa, why is it not working over there either? They're destroying Africa as well.
I'm unaware of that. I know we see pieces of it on television. I've seen what's going on in South Africa in particular, but we also might just be getting the highlight reel. For example, they can put things on television in the United States that make white people look like these extremely evil, extremely bad people. And a lot of liberal news networks do that. And it would be very easy for networks to do that to black people in Africa. So I'm not 100% sure if I can be sold on it.
So we did a report on my show either today or yesterday where one thing that happened in Africa, the reason that most blacks are so screwed up over there, is that they stopped worshiping God and they started worshiping idol gods like women and snakes and slavery, and because a lot of blacks were enslaved by other blacks, and they voodoo and all kinds of things, and that's what's wrong with them in this country too. They don't really believe in God.
Well, isn't that white people as well?
But
We worship Hollywood, the porn industry, the music industry. Half of the people are on drugs and alcohol. I
so is
think
that true about the blacks?
you could say so, yeah, but I think it's all across the board. I think it's not just black people. I think it's white people as well.
What is the white culture?
In the United States, I don't know if we have one here either. It's a new culture here as well. And white culture is not something that can be taught. It's not something that we learn about in school. We learn about explorers and, different leaders, Julius Caesar, whatever. We learn about different leaders around the world and world history, but we don't know much about white culture. We've had too many world wars in Europe, and, America's too new. So we're not quite sure what that is either. So in the United States, we don't necessarily have much of a culture. On Monday, we might have Italian food. On Tuesday, we might have Chinese food. On Wednesday, we might have Mexican food. And that's just kind of how American culture is.
Or soul food. White people love soul food sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
On Saturdays.
Sure.
And so if white people don't have a culture, why are they doing so much better than the blacks? And the blacks have a new culture, as you said. They made up this stuff. So if whites don't have a culture, why are they doing so much better than what the blacks are doing and they don't have one?
Well, I think you have a little bit of, I don't know if I want to call it brainwashing, or indoctrination. White people are taught as children to go to college, get your degree. Most of their parents set up bank accounts for them as children and get them started financially. And I think in a lot of black neighborhoods that those sort of things just aren't happening. It's slowly transitioning, but it's a process.
When I was growing up, black people were not into culture. They were Americans. And we went to all black schools and things like that. They did integrate my school the last year in 1968 when I was graduating. But other than that, blacks didn't have a culture. They were not into that at all. And they did much better than they are today. Jim Crow existed and all that, but black people did much better than they did today. Why they bought land? They knew that our battle was a spiritual battle, so they weren't hating white people. They didn't have leaders. There was the father and the mother and the grandparents. They didn't have leaders. Why weren't my generation of blacks like the blacks are today? If it's because they were taken from Africa or from their culture, why didn't it affect us in the same way?
Well, I think it was sort of a fresh out mentality at first. When they first had they had the same opportunities as white people, they were taking advantage of it. Could possibly have something to do with the church, I don't know, or things that kept them in a straight line. But a lot of things happened, a lot of, I guess, the culture that Hollywood and the music industry pushed, I think maybe made a big change on them.
Is it possible that they gave up their lives and turned them over to other people to lead them, like the so-called civil rights leaders and other people? Because prior to the civil rights leaders, black people didn't have leaders. There were no Martin Luther King and Jesse Jackson and all those kind of people to lead them. Is it possible it was a big mistake to turn their lives over to somebody else to lead them? And and allow these people to take advantage of them? They stopped thinking for themselves. They started to allow the government, destroy the family and all that.
Yeah, it would be a big mistake for anybody to hope for another man, especially a celebrity or a public figure, to turn your life around for you. That goes for anybody. There's plenty of white kids in the trailer park that are screwing up too. But every man should know, every man should realize that it is fully in your power to get up and make something of your life. You don't see, and there's plenty of black millionaires, in the NBA and, even politicians, doctors, whatever it may be, that are taking accountability for themselves. Ben Carson, for example, they're holding themselves accountable and they're not making excuses and they're accomplishing things. But anybody that puts their future in somebody else's hands, that's idiotic.
Do you agree with me that one of the worst things that ever happened to the blacks was the civil rights movement?
Yes and no. Because I would say yes, because there were some rights back then that they didn't quite have, and it helped them earn those rights.
Like what, for example?
Well, there was certain, like segregation and redlining and things like that. I mean, those were issues that were holding them back, weren't they?
Holding them back how?
Well, it's a big market out there, and if they're not allowed to get involved in that side of it, the white side of it, then they're probably going to struggle.
No, they were not struggling. They started so-called Black Wall Street, and Black Wall Street was destroyed, and they rebuilt it. They rebuilt it again, and they were restricted to as where they can live. They had jobs. They started businesses during the days when I was growing up, and even before that. They were not restricted. Not being able to live in a certain neighborhood shouldn't restrict you in life.
Yeah, well, I suppose there was a dose of reality whenever they entered the market that white people were in, because there were a lot of white people that already had money, they already had establishments, and the way capitalism works, big bank takes little bank. So when you're just you're entering that market, you're going to struggle for quite some time. But I think by and large in, the modern day, I think skin color doesn't really play much of a role. I think anybody can make it.
But in those days, black people paid their bills. They paid their house notes, and if they borrowed money from you, they'll pay it back. Nowadays, black people don't pay back. Remember when some years ago now, when the government allowed them to get all those loans to buy homes and things like that.
Yeah.
And the blacks wouldn't pay the notes. They wouldn't pay back the loans. And we had a crash market because they would not. Why would a bank want to let them have money when they're not going to pay back?
Well, I'm not going to say it's because they were black.
They were black, they didn't pay. Black people don't pay back. You notice that?
Well, the banks were giving loans to people that didn't have good credit.
Mostly blacks, though.
Maybe so.
No, it was. Maxine Waters and all those people pushed that. The Wicked Witch of the West with the low IQ.
Oh, okay, I can't challenge that. But when you give loans to people with bad credit, they're high risk.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, Jesse, I don't know what to say.
Was there anything else good about the so-called civil rights movement?
Well, personally, I growing up in Columbus, Ohio, it's a very mixed city. I grew up with a lot of friends, of all different cultures and ethnicities, and I enjoy being around different cultures and different people. So for me personally, I'm happy that it happened because there's a lot of black friends that I wouldn't have made had that not happened.
But how do you know that, though?
Well, I don't, but I know that it was put in place, so it played a role in it.
Because if the so-called civil rights movement had not happened, the blacks and whites would have come together naturally, as they were doing prior to the civil rights movement. Because good people like hanging out with good people, bad people like hanging out with bad people, and that come in all colors, all races, and they would have come together naturally rather than trying to force them together, because trying to force them together have divided even more so. You can't make someone love you. They have to want to love you.
That's a valid point. But would they have came together, or would
Yeah.
they be fighting even worse? We don't know.
No, they're fighting worse now than they were prior to the civil rights movement.
Okay. Well, they weren't together before the civil rights movement, were
Yes,
they?
yeah.
Were they?
Those who wanted to be together, those who didn't were not, but they
Okay.
were together.
Okay, I can see that.
Amazing.